Welcome to the Military Justice Today podcast with your host, Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams, covering the full range of military law topics from all branches of the armed forces. Today's episode is made possible in part by the law firm of Capovilla and Williams. And now, let's welcome the hosts of the show, Rob and Mickey.
All right, everybody, here we go. Another episode of Military Justice Today. I'm Matt Starosiak, sitting across the podcast desk from Robert Capovilla. It says host Mickey Williams and Robert Capovilla, but no Mickey today.
No Mickey today.
I bet he's lifting.
No, I think Mickey's in court today.
Yeah? Litigating?
Yeah, Mickey's kind of the rock, the backbone of our litigation teams.
What a good man, no? That Mickey Williams?
Oh, great guy. One of the best you'll ever meet.
So we were just laughing pre-show about doing it live. Anytime somebody says, I'll do it live or we're doing it live, you can't help but laugh. You just have to laugh at it.
That's right. That's from the old Bill O'Reilly. I don't know, that footage of him getting really ticked off because there was something wrong with the teleprompter or whatever.
Yeah. Sting was going to play him out.
Yeah, this thing sucks, So yeah, we were joking about that in a little pre-show discussion we were having.
When that first came out, like that clip, I mean, maybe it just resurfaced. I don't know how long it had been out, but he actually talked about it on O'Reilly, the O'Reilly Factor, and it was funny because he basically said, I know there's a clip going around me on the internet, and something along the lines of "it is what it is," just with a smirk on his face. It was almost like he was proud of it.
Yeah, well, Bill O'Reilly had a reputation, had a unique reputation, and not everybody liked him. And I think that there were some allegations that he was, he had harassed some coworkers or whatever. And when you see that clip, he's not harassing anybody, but you can certainly see a temper in there. But I can relate in this sense. When you have high standards for yourself and you want something done right and it's not done right, it can be disappointing. So I understand why he got upset because, his reputation and his who he is as a journalist is on the line every time he went on camera. So you don't want to be made fool of. I understand.
Yeah. And you never know what was brewing. I mean, it could have been stuff going on for years and years that he had tolerated. I doubt it, frankly, but it's possible. And then they catch him at like his worst moment where he's just had enough. Like he can't take anymore and he explodes.
He really is huffing and puffing too. Like he's like breathing heavy and stuff. Like he is ready to roll. Like if somebody said the wrong thing, he was out of that chair and it'd have been problems.
Yeah, the greatest actor in the world couldn't have done that. Couldn't have played that.
That's right. You clearly saw that Bill O'Reilly has quite the temper. But again, I understand. He wanted it done right and it wasn't done right, and that's frustrating.
You can relate to him.
I can. I don't get that angry anymore. I try very hard to have patience, but I understand where he's coming from.
Well, you've never kept it piffy, though. Piffy?
That's his word.
Yeah, you've never kept it that, so you can't relate to that, can you?
Yeah, no, I don't. I haven't watched Bill O'Reilly or anything that he's been on for 15 years.
Yeah. Well,
my dad loved him, though. I kind of grew up with Bill O'Reilly.
I know
my dad loved him.
I know he still has a show and stuff, and but he's obviously slowed down a bit, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's got to be older. I mean, he was big deal. He was a big deal when I was growing up. So we're talking the early 2000s was when he was like the height of his power. And I always enjoyed his shows. I actually think part of the reason that whatever speaking abilities I have, I oftentimes credit to the fact that my dad watched all those debate shows for years and I would watch with him. So I'm very familiar with Bill O'Reilly. And I've read some of his books too. I think in college I read like Killing Kennedy, and there was another one that he read. I don't think I read Killing Jesus, but I'm certain I read Killing Kennedy. Maybe I read Killing Lincoln.
Yeah, it's interesting. My feeling on a lot of those guys is that their early days, they were very, very good. They'd have guests on. They'd pit the guests against each other. When they said, I'll give you the last word, they actually meant it, and they gave him the last word. And now a lot of those guys, I think, as they get into their careers, they digress, and it becomes less and less of that. And to me, it becomes less interesting. I don't want to hear the same monologue every day. Whether I agree with it or not, I don't want to hear the same stuff every day, and I want the guests to have an opportunity to go at each other and that kind of stuff.
I don't have an opportunity to watch those shows like I used to. When I do have free time,
you don't want to spend it doing that.
No, it's usually spent relaxing and smoking a cigar and watching some baseball or watching some college football, depending on the season. But I do read a lot, as you know. I do love to read, so I find time to do that.
All right, well, we're gonna do kind of a more lighthearted episode. We do these once in a while. We're gonna answer some listener questions. I'm gonna ask you some tough questions. I always like to stump you. Remember the last time we did that? Like you had no idea how to answer most of the stuff I asked you. So we're gonna see if we can.
I disagree with that.
We're
but
gonna
that's how
see if
you
we can
remember it.
We're gonna see if we can stump the master today. But I want to do a little bit of a pre-show topic because I've got to talk to you about a documentary I saw recently, and I recommended it to you, but I don't think you had a chance to watch it yet. But it's called Just 1 Mile. Have you heard of it before? Did you see that information I sent you on it?
Oh, you know what? Somebody, I did see what you sent me on it, and then somebody else brought this up to me recently. I forget.
It's a must-watch.
Oh, it's the people who just run the mile, like, and the last person standing wins.
That's right. So let me give you the premise of it.
Yes. Joe Rogan, I think, talked about this.
Yeah. So, and I, I'm surprised he got to it before I did. But the documentary is called Just 1 Mile, just period, 1 period mile, period. I think I watched it on Amazon, might be available other places. But it is about a race that's held in Tennessee, in the Tennessee mountains. The race is called, I think, the Mid-State Mile. And it's a 1 mile loop. I think it's actually 1.1 to be accurate because somebody will call us out. But I think it's a 1 mile loop in the mountains. So the elevation is like 65 feet up and then down in the same mile. And the object of the race is to keep running that mile within 20 minutes until there's nobody else running it. So there's no end point other than outlasting the last person so that you're the number one. So, and you have 20 minutes to complete each lap. So if you finish it in 15 minutes, you can sit around, rest for 15 minutes, refuel or whatever. But the documentary is great. I'd highly recommend it. Take a guess at what the winner of the one in the documentary, and there's been obviously different performances over the years, but take a guess at how many laps he did and over what time period.
I couldn't guess the time period. I know that there are ultra marathon runners out there. I actually just finished the book Endurance by Cameron Hayes, and that's where I heard about this because he talked about this race in his book, I believe. And anyway, if anybody wants to read a cool book, that book was pretty cool. Cameron Hayes is a cool guy. Anyway, I want 100 miles, 105 miles.
Okay, so that's about right. The winner did 110 laps. And I think that comes out to like 130 miles or something like that. Because like I said, they're a little over a mile.
That's intense.
But the hours, it was 36 hours.
Yeah. Well, that's consistent with what I know about the ultramarathoners. They usually run like 28 to 30 hours in those 100-mile races. Your wife does some of that stuff. Your wife's done like a 50-miler and stuff.
Well, she hasn't really gotten into the ultra stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's...
Your wife is a professional runner, man. You should give her credit.
She's not a professional runner anymore.
She has a Wikipedia page. She's a professional runner.
You love to bring that up, don't you?
She's a professional runner.
All right. So I do have questions for you. There is a point to this, but it's funny. The guy who won it was an ex-SEAL or ex-Special Forces.
That's
guy.
right. I think he was a Navy SEAL. I think I heard about
he
this.
won it. Well, I'm not going to spoil it. I guess I already did spoil it. He won it 2 years in a row, and it was fascinating to watch him. I mean, the way he approached it, the way he approached the race and his mindset and the things it got a little tiring at a certain point of the documentary, but it was really fascinating to see how strong this guy was mentally. I mean, from the get-go, he was basically like, I'm going to keep going until my body breaks. There's nothing mentally that's going to stop me from continuing to do these laps.
Well, that's not surprising. He's a Navy SEAL, and those folks are some of the toughest in the entire world. I had a guy one time tell me, a guy that I served with, I obviously won't mention his name for obvious reasons, but he was a good friend of mine. And we were talking about Ranger School one time. And he said to me something that stuck with me. He goes, honestly, when I was in Ranger School, I just made my mind up that I was going to die there. And that made it easier to get through. I just said to myself, there's no going home. There's nothing on the other side of this. I'm going to die here. And, I just cut out all the thought about home out of my mind. And I think whether it's business, whether it's military, whether it's any endeavor that you seek to obtain in your life, that's a pretty good attitude to have, that either I'm going to do it or I'm going to die. And I think if you have that attitude, you're more than likely going to be successful. And hopefully the success is that you're going to do it and not die, right?
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because that's something that this guy said in the documentary. He said, I know I'm not going to die out here. So, he said, I know I'm going to live through this. Of course, watching some of those people exercise and run to exhaustion, I was surprised they didn't have more medical staff out there because, some of them, as you can imagine, they were delirious. When you're running for 30 hours straight, you're hallucinating. I mean, it's crazy.
I love reading books about endurance athletes. I love hearing about what makes them, what goes through their minds. And I've read all the books by Goggins, and I've read the Jocko books, and I've read like I said, I read the Cameron Haynes book recently, and I've read some books on performance from endurance athletes. And man, I tell you what, like, those guys and gals really, really are impressive. And I try to apply those principles into my life.
If you were competing in something like that, and let's assume you were in a little bit better shape than you are today, if you were competing, would you rather compete against a single person like this race, or would you rather compete against the goal? The goal might be finish something within a certain amount of time.
The goal.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm surprised that you said that.
Yeah,
so you'd rather compete against the goal than another human being?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm shocked.
I think that's what I'd rather do. Now, what would I be more successful in doing if I was forced to do it? I would probably be more successful in running against others because I am very competitive.
Sounds like a hedge.
Well, what I'm saying is, I at this point, if somebody said you have to go out and run a half marathon at this time, I would focus. I would focus on that. Be prepared for that. That's easier to prepare for, right? You have a time you have to train on. When you're talking about just being the last man standing, you train as hard as you can, but there's no set time. You just keep going till everybody else falls apart. So,
but you're very
that's
competitive.
Hard.
You're very competitive.
I am, but do you know the weight that comes with that? The weight that comes with demanding that kind of excellency of yourself, whether it's in a court martial or a run. So if you're asking me what I would rather do, I would rather do the set time.
Yeah.
If you're asking me, what do I think I would be successful in a competition like that? I think I probably would.
I knew for sure you'd figure out a way to answer that like a trial lawyer.
That's probably what most people are thinking too.
I guess let's get into the main topic of the podcast today, which again is going to be somewhat lighthearted, but we're going to cover some listener questions. We're going to cover some tough questions from me, perhaps some things that we just want to talk about. These are always pretty well received, surprisingly.
I love the listener questions. I really... And listen, not everybody out there likes what we stand for. Not everybody out there that listens to the podcast likes everything we say, but I always appreciate the people who send us questions on YouTube or wherever else that we get them. And we get a lot of them. I mean, I think in the last quarter we got like 25 questions from folks, and I'm very humbled by that. In fact, our episode where we had the father come on and talk about the court-martial process was the most listened episode of Capovilla Williams ever. Yeah, I think we were north of 4,000 listeners. And if you think about that and where we started, Matt, as a podcast, to think that we had 4,000 listeners is incredible.
Yeah, but that was a great podcast. So
it was.
I'm not surprised. And we're very grateful for Howard to come on and do that.
Yes.
Because it wasn't easy for any of us three during that particular session.
No.
But all right, so you've seen a couple of these. In all honesty, most of you have not. Let's talk about media coverage on your cases. So you've handled cases over the years, some with a lot of media coverage, some with none, and then kind of everything in between. You've got one right now that is all over the media, all over the national media, and will continue to be so, I think, at least into the near future. Those cases create significant challenges, I know, for you, because I talk about some of the issues with you in the business that we do together. And I think one of the hardest things is, you're somewhat limited oftentimes by what you can say, even correcting things that aren't accurate, right? So sometimes the other side is out there saying anything that they want to say, and you're either limited because your client doesn't want you out there, or you just strategically, you don't, it's not the right time to speak. You're going to do your work in the courtroom. Sometimes you're even misquoted. We've had that happen here in the last year where you sent a statement and somebody kindly paraphrased it for you and blasted it out there on a very popular publication that is catered to the military. So I know you've dealt with those challenges. I think the question is, how do you deal with them? How frustrating is it? How do you know you're making the right decision? Do you ever make the wrong decision when it comes to the media? And where do you see kind of your evolution going with the cases that you're handling?
Every single case is very important to us at Capovilla Williams. And the overwhelming majority of our cases don't ever get media coverage, and sometimes they probably should, because I wish there was more coverage on the cases that go forward that should never, ever go forward. But the media is not interested in covering that, right? So my experience with the media, by and large, has been very positive. I've had a few interactions that I did not appreciate, and that does add stress to an otherwise stressful situation. But what I would say about cases where there's media involvement is that sticking to your fundamentals as a lawyer becomes even more important because you can get distracted by the coverage. Some lawyers get, intoxicated with the coverage. It becomes all about the coverage. And I just think that you stick to your principles, you stick to the fundamentals of what makes a good defense. You try to keep your answer simple and honest. And yes, I've had cases where, by and large, the JAG Corps, the PAO, and the folks that deal with these higher profile cases, they always say very professional things. I've never had an issue with like a prosecutor or a member of the Army saying something that they shouldn't say. What I've come across are civilian victim advocates who clearly have an agenda. They file FTCA claims on behalf of their clients, and they go out and make all these crazy statements, and a lot of them are not accurate. And the media eats that up. I mean, when a victim advocate gets out there and, for lack of a better term, urinates all over the military justice system and makes these ridiculous arguments that the military doesn't care about victims of sexual assault, the media just eats that up. You try as a defense lawyer to say the opposite of that, to say, well, listen, that's not exactly how it is. Here's all the rights and benefits these people have. You will not get published. You will be shunned out of the room. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to talk about it. The whole goal is to show that the military doesn't care about sexual assault victims, which is always shocking to me because we, by and large, if you ask society, they would tell you that military officers and military service members have high levels of character. I mean, we expect these people to go fight our nation's wars, and yet we think these same people with these values and this character and this integrity, when it comes to sex assault, throw all of that out the window.
Yeah.
It's the most ridiculous thing you can imagine.
It's interesting you say that the mainstream media at least doesn't want to cover the other half of the story, which, it involves a lot of things, the rights of the accused and all kinds of other things related to that. But it is interesting to see sometimes where you'll send a statement off and they'll publish half of it and then they'll leave the half out about just about the accusers, the rights the accuser has, or even what the Army or Navy or Marines, what they do to protect. They'll leave that out conveniently.
Yeah, I had an interview with CNN a couple years ago now, and it was about sexual assault. This is when President Biden made the change that said, hey, any founded investigation of sexual harassment must lead to initiation or separation. I was contacted by CNN, which was cool, right?
Yeah.
And
name, organization.
Yeah. And we conducted a full interview, and I talked about how, my concerns were that this rule would undermine due process, and a lot of these investigators that are conducting these investigations for the military are not trained investigators. They're officers that may work in supply or infantry or whatever, and then they're taken out of their job and they're tasked with understanding complex dynamics, and that we should have if this is what President Biden wants to do, there should be a new MOS that specifically allows service members and trains them on how to conduct fair investigations. And instead, the solution is let's put a first-term judge advocate to advise these investigations, which is not the answer. And the only thing that she quoted from me was a one line that said, something like all sexual harassment should be eradicated from the military. And I said that my exact quote was, the goal needs to be with these investigations to eradicate sexual harassment from the military. And I said, but it's got to be done in a professional manner that respects the rights of the accused and the accuser. Yeah. And that was taken out completely. And it was just, and now, people in my office make fun of me and say, maybe I missed my calling as a victim advocate. Victim advocates have tough jobs. It's an important job. It's not my calling personally. But that is an example of how you can be taken out of context.
Yeah, you just have to be careful talking to the media. I mean, me. I guess I probably border on the side of paranoia sometimes, but I've just seen it so many times where things get cut up, they get spliced up, and next thing you know, you end up getting quoted for something the opposite of what you're really trying to say.
Or it's just kind of funny how they do things like CBS ran a special, right, on a case we have, and, it was 10 minutes of nothing but the victim advocate and the alleged victims. Yeah. And they read one line from me and then wouldn't even say my name, right? Yeah. That's just the way it is. That's the world we deal with. If you're wanting to be the most popular man of all time as a defense lawyer, you got something else coming to you, because that's not how it works.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's not why you do it. There, there are some people who want to be in the media, and God bless them, and we need them, and we need them out there. But if you're a defense attorney, that's not really.
No, they're not going to be too interested in what you have to say most of the time. A lot of them do a good job.
Yeah. All right, here is another question. How are things different, or how are things being handled differently now with the Office of Special Trial Counsel? So I think now January 1 kind of was the official launch of that office, right? And you've seen some major changes in personnel and procedure. Now we're 4 months into it. Can you comment on what you think is different? Maybe even what's been better, what's been worse? I don't know. I don't know how much you've seen with it, but certainly you're in a great position to comment on where it's at today versus where it was.
Oddly, it seems eerily similar to the prior system. And I thought one of the things that I'm on record saying is, geez, I think this will be better I think the OSTC and dealing directly with lawyers will make access to those lawyers a little easier, right? Will make getting deals done a little easier. What I mean by that is, like, typically you would submit a plea deal or a plea offer or whatever they want to call it these days, and it would go to the CG for approval with the staff judge advocate's recommendation. And, almost very seldom would you ever have a face-to-face with the CG, right? That officer is dealing with an entire division or installation or whatever. So I thought lawyer-to-lawyer communication would help facilitate some things. What I'm finding is the folks who make the decisions at the OSTC are just like dealing with commanders. It's very hard to get face-to-faces with them. You're still dealing with people at the trial level, like the trial counsel, that are part of the OSTC. They still can't make decisions really on their own. Now, I haven't had a ton of interactions with the OSTC up to this point, and it's been mostly bigger cases. So that's why there's more, I think, senior or top-down leadership going on there. So I can't speak for every case, but it's very eerily similar in that sense. I think what we all have noticed is the OSTC is being far more picky about the kind of cases they're going forward with. They are killing far more cases than we ever saw with, like, under the old system.
You're talking about cases that really shouldn't be brought because they lack evidence?
Correct.
Or?
Like, I think there's a much stronger emphasis with the Office of Special Trial Counsel. I don't know if this pressure is coming from Congress or whatever to get convictions. And I think that they're turning down more cases than the old system used to because they want more convictions. And I think that while their motive, I don't think is correct. I don't think it should be about more convictions so you can go to Congress and say, we're getting convictions that are similar to the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is what I think they're trying to do. But I think the benefit of that is, a lot of these cases that should never have seen the light of day in a courtroom are not seeing the light of day. So I think that's a good positive step. Some folks might think, well, Rob, in your business, don't you want more cases?
I was going to say, that's want two sides to a coin there for you.
We want our service members to be treated fairly, is what we want. And
there's still plenty of business out there for law firm.
And a lot of these cases that went in the past should never have seen a courtroom, and they did. So I'm hopeful the OSTC has the impact. I'm hopeful that it professionalizes the system. I'm also a little bit concerned about our defense counsel in the military, especially after Brigadier General Warren's firing. I'm concerned about it. And I'll say this. My concern stems from, it certainly seems like a lot of resources are going to the OSTC office, and not a lot is going to making sure these service members have a good defense.
Yeah.
And that is a real concern.
You've seen some of this firsthand recently. I
have. And, it seems like all the best, all the most senior counsel are going to the OSTC, and that's fine, but I worry about our service members who can't afford to hire civilians, right? I worry about our service members who are accused of something they didn't do, and what does this mean for their representation moving forward?
Yeah, because that is true. I mean, y'all have a lot of clients that you represent. You're contacted by even more potential clients, but the reality is some of those people, for whatever reason, and maybe it's an issue of finances, they're not going to be able to hire a civilian defense attorney.
Right.
And so you need to have the right people in place to provide them with a fair and zealous defense. So.
Yes.
Okay, next question. This is from a listener who listens to the podcast and follows our YouTube page. They had referenced that you're a follower of Jesus, Rob. You're a Christian. You talk a lot about your high morals and high ethical standards. But I think their question gets to the idea of how do you reconcile that with representing people who are at least accused of some very serious and troubling crimes and charges. How do you reconcile those two things as a person?
Well, I think this actually is. We were talking before the show. Have we gotten this question before? I think this is the second time we've had a listener.
We've covered it at least in another podcast.
Yeah, I think this is the second time a listener has asked a similar question, and my response is pretty simple. First and foremost, I don't see any conflict between my beliefs as a Christian and what I do for a living. Jesus Christ himself was wrongly accused of a crime. Jesus Christ himself was the victim of false allegations. Jesus Christ himself was crucified under false pretenses, right? So I think that Jesus would understand my understanding of the Gospels, and I understand them well. I study the history of Christianity. I study the historical Jesus. I think Jesus would understand that, number one, people make mistakes, obviously, but number two, that false allegations happen. You know, one of the most powerful passages in the New Testament occurs when Jesus is brought before the Sanhedrin. And all he has to do is denounce who he is. That's all he's got to do. He's just got to say, I am not the Son of God. I don't proclaim to be the Son of God. And that's all it takes. And he remains silent. Some of the versions of the gospel say that, he makes some statements about that. I am who you say I am the Son of Man. But a lot of times he just remains silent. He doesn't lower himself. He doesn't want to answer that question. He doesn't lower himself because he has so much confidence in who he is. And I think that that's something that sticks with me. So I think Jesus would understand that what it is to be falsely accused. I think he would understand that.
But I think I want to push back now as a good interview. I want to push back.
Yeah.
Let's put aside the person who's falsely accused, and let's put aside the person who makes a one-time mistake.
Yeah.
What about the person who's really just an ugly human being who does something that, maybe there's a video, maybe there's irrefutable in ways proof that this person did something absolutely despicable, maybe to a child or maybe something else. How do you represent that person?
My beliefs as a Christian, my belief in Jesus Christ, my belief in the empty tomb, my belief in the resurrection, tells me that we all make mistakes. And that's something that is certainly known about Jesus Christ, right? He who throws the stone to the glass home, right? To the glass house. We're all sinners. And certainly people do worse things than others. But I think everybody can be redeemed if they ask for forgiveness through Jesus Christ. I believe that with all of my heart. So, on one hand, I don't think anybody's perfect. In fact, there's only been one perfect life in the history of the world. On the other hand, and this is not a Christian value of mine, I'm also a believer in something called the United States Constitution. And I believe that everybody deserves a zealous and fair defense. I don't think that representing people, even in my own heart, if I think they did it, somehow betrays my beliefs as a Christian or somehow betrays what I think about our justice system. So I hope that answers the question. My Christian values and my beliefs are my number one priority in my life, but certainly my beliefs about the Constitution and about the rights to fairness and individual rights are right up there.
I like the answer. I think it was well given. Remember the other day when we were having dinner together and I grabbed your hand to pray before the meal and you just had this utter look of disbelief on your face? Like you couldn't believe that I reached across the table and I was actually going to say a prayer. Remember that?
Yes, I do remember that.
And you remember how shocked you were.
Anybody who's got a relationship with Jesus Christ has different feelings about that relationship, different things that they think make them close to Jesus. And I can tell you that I feel in my prayer life, I feel the most close to Jesus when I'm representing somebody who really needs my help, even if they did something wrong. I think that is that in the Gospels? No, but I'm telling you just from my own personal experience, that's when I feel the closest to my faith, because there is something. We have to remember Jesus walked into essentially a courtroom in front of the Sanhedrin by himself, no support. And I think there's something about walking into a courtroom with an individual that everybody else has condemned and having the courage to stand up for that individual that strengthens my faith. And so that's my official answer to the question.
All right. I guess we have to buy it. We don't have a choice at this point. No, I mean, really, the world needs really good defense attorneys because it's a slippery slope when you start saying this person doesn't deserve a defense and that person does. And it sounds great. Like I've always said this before, it sounds great, to condemn people based on an accusation up until the time that person's your father or your brother or your sister. And then all of a sudden that kind of goes out the door.
That's well said. I grow shocked at how quickly people are to throw the rights of Americans out the window in the name of like Me Too. I mean, what do we want, Matt? Do we want somebody pointing a finger at another American citizen and saying he did something really bad to me, and then all of a sudden that American citizen's thrown into a freaking dungeon like it's 1755 and we're still under the rule of England? Yeah. No, that's not how it should be. And I'm going to go off on a tangent here for just 1 minute, and then we'll get back to the questions.
Can I edit this out if we need to?
No, do not. You do not have my permission to edit this one out, and I'll be quick about it. President Biden's decision to say everybody with a founded investigation of sexual harassment must face a board undermines due process. Okay. President Biden's decision to say, I'm getting rid of a Title IX, under Title IX, I'm getting rid of the right to cross-examine an accuser because I respect people. Well, what about due process? I mean, what are we actually saying? That allegations by themselves are enough to seriously damper or otherwise unhinge an American citizen? That we're okay as a society saying, you know what? If you're accused of something, we don't care what you have to say. We're taking away your rights. We're throwing you in jail. We're taking away your scholarship. We're kicking you out of school. And the last thing I'll say is, I bet you Joe Biden doesn't want that for his son, Hunter Biden. I mean, who is facing serious prosecution.
Even for himself. I mean, there's people that have made accusations against him, and he deserves a fair defense, and it's kind of hard. I'd love to hear how he reconciles those two things.
And I'm not...
should people be believed? And
I don't consider...
they should, what about the people that are accusing you of inappropriate stuff?
And I don't consider myself to be a Republican or a Democrat, to be frank. I don't particularly like either party. But to me, it's just shocking how the very same folks who are supposed to uphold the principles of democracy are so quick to simply deny us the rights that otherwise I think we ought to have.
Americans are very quick to swing the pendulum all the way to the extremes, I think. And maybe other countries are too. I'm no scholar in that area, but it just seems like we love to swing the pendulum to one end or the other.
Yep.
And it's very hard to find a middle ground or reasonable ground. All right. Next question. If you were building the perfect military trial attorney, what would be the 3 characteristics or traits you would want most from that person, man or woman? And these can be a skill set, so it could be knowledge of the rules of evidence, or it could be integrity or honesty or forthrightness,
That's the
easiest
question you ever asked me.
And now don't go off on a tangent on all the...
No, I know.
Values and all that.
Well, no. If you're asking me, the reason I created the core values...
That's not the question.
The reason I created the core values was to create the perfect military justice attorney. And so what that means is, number 1, that's a person who puts the client first.
Okay.
Number 2, that's a person who understands zealous advocacy and is the best attorney in any courtroom that he walks into because of his preparation. Number 3, okay, toughness and courage. You got to be tough to be a military defense attorney in this day and age because, there's in every court martial I have now, I feel like I'm ganged up upon. The SVC hates you. The prosecutors don't like you. A lot of times the judge, for whatever reason, isn't particularly favorable. So when you're a defense lawyer now and you walk into a courtroom and at least 2 of the other lawyers in there, the prosecutor and the SVC, are working against you every way, shape that you can imagine, you got to be tough. So that would be it. That attorney would put the client first.
Okay.
They would be outstanding in the courtroom and know the rules of evidence better than the back of their own hand. They'd understand how to tell a story. And then number 3, they would be tough. And that's exactly what a great military justice attorney should be made of.
All right. Well, with that, we will wrap it up for another episode of Military Justice Today. I'm Matt Starosiak with Robert Capovilla, signing off. Take care, everybody, and stay safe.
Thanks for listening to the Military Justice Today podcast with your hosts, Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams. This show was made possible in part by the law firm of Capovilla and Williams. For more information or to listen to more episodes, visit militaryjusticetoday.com.